Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Anthony's Journey. So, today we're actually going to talk through a lot of things that happened to me in 2021. And the first thing that actually happened was that we actually decided to end up buying our third house. So, I was actually making a decent amount of money working as a consultant. So, we actually decided that said, hey, maybe it's time for our third house now. So, after working so many hours at my consulting gig, I was still working a good amount of hours, especially around Q4, which basically just means the last 3 months of the year. October, November, December, I was working through quite a few things for my client. So I was like, okay, now that I have this extra money, maybe it's time to continue our investment path. So we started to look at houses. One of the first houses that we actually looked at was in upstate New York. It was like a small ranch. It was around $50,000, and then we kept looking at the upstate area, and our budget wasn't too big. We were looking for something that was around $100,000, in the sense of like compared to houses today, of course. So yeah, so we kept searching, and we finally found this one house in upstate New York. It was in a small town called Roscoe, New York, and yeah, it was a huge house. It was like 3,500 square feet, and had I think it had 8 rooms, 4 bathrooms, and it was right by the riverfront, which was something that my parents were searching for a long time. Houses by the riverfront usually don't come very often, so we were super excited to go see the place. And yeah, so we ended up going to see the house, and it was a beautiful area, lots of friendly people, and the only thing was that the house was around $75,000, but it was a pretty hot mess. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, so we ended up actually deciding to actually purchase the house. So I took out a loan, and I ended up buying the house for the $75,000 asking price. And yeah, it was we were ecstatic. We were like, wow, we're owning our third property now. So now we're going to continue on our journey of investment. Now, 2021 was definitely a weird time for me, in the sense of, not only was I still, of course, working as a consultant and pumping in my hours, but at the same time, I was really growing into my senior revenue accountant role, where I was actually working with, funny enough, other consultants, and these were external consultants, of course, on drafting up the company's policies, their ASC 606 memo, which relates to revenue and sales. And it was weird, because it felt like I was actually taking charge of my position for the first time. I felt like I was in control. In the past, I always thought about myself as not being good enough. So I would have a case of imposter syndrome all the time, where I felt like I wasn't good enough to actually meet the role or do my job. But as I started to work more with my consultants, more with my new coworkers, I realized that things weren't as bad as I thought. Yeah, I thought I always needed someone to kind of guide me, and I realized that I was actually a lot more self-sufficient than I thought. I was actually working on projects on my own, drafting up policies, drafting up project plans, and it felt really great to finally realize that I was coming into my second win, as they say. So as I started to work with my client more and more, though, something that came to my mind was, hey, like, I already passed the 4 parts of my CPA exam. I've already, like, I have enough school credits. I essentially just needed the work experience, someone I could work under. But one of the rules is that usually, like, when you're working as a consultant, technically you don't really have a direct report or a manager. So essentially, I could never have someone to really sign off on my CPA. So that was always weighing on my mind, and I was like, hey, like, there was something I could always get, in the sense of like what it was, the CPA, but it was kind of within my grasp, but I couldn't get it because of just because I couldn't get the 1 year of experience under a manager. So as I started to work through my engagement with my client, I was thinking, like, maybe I should start looking for another role. Maybe I get out of the consulting game and try to actually get into a more go back essentially to the private sector in the sense as an employee instead of a consultant. So as I kind of thought about this, I actually it was a weird time because I was working on my engagements. We just finished our audit for 2020, and then out of nowhere, I was actually given a jury summons. So I was given a jury summons, and my current client slash employer weren't really too happy about that because it was actually for a grand jury summons, and I actually had to go away for a whole month. So I was essentially a whole month away from my client, and they weren't really happy about that because it was a weird time at my client because we were actually in the process of going through a transition. So the first thing was is that Electric AI, which is my client at the time, they actually were going to implement a new software called NetSuite. So NetSuite is an ERP, or an enterprise resource planner. Basically, what this software is it's an accounting software that allows you to record all of your transactions. And essentially, I was in the thick of it. I was actually helping out the senior accountant at the time to actually implement the software. So I did a lot of the more revenue or sales side of the house, where I would check to make sure that the transactions were flowing correctly. For example, were the invoices being created correctly, or when the revenue module ran, was the revenue amount correct? So it was definitely a weird time where I was not supposed to be out of office, if that makes sense. So I was stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony, and I'm the host of TheLostSanctuary. I hope you've been enjoying our content so far, and if you have, please feel free to like and subscribe. Also, we have our website up here, and we also have some socials down here. And as always, leave your comments down below.
So yeah, as I was thinking about this, I was like, okay, so how can I make, not just, I know I got the jury service, so I have to think about how do I accommodate the client while still, of course, meeting my obligation to be a juror. So what I did is that I actually ended up working before my jury service, usually an hour, where I would meet with our consultants who were helping us implement the NetSuite instance. And then I would also work in the evenings right after my time in jury service. So I would effectively work at 7 or 8 a.m. for an hour right before my jury service. Then I would rush out, and then I would come back at around 6 or 7, and then I'll work until 10 or 11 p.m. So yeah, so I actually did this for the whole month that I was in jury service. Sometimes, essentially I think starting at around 9 or 10, I couldn't really have calls. So essentially I was out of pocket for my jury service, but I did make the commitment to my client and to my employer that I was going to continue to meet the demands of the implementation of the new client software, which was NetSuite. I was going to continue to help test all the features, make sure that everything was being implemented correctly, and this also included the implementation of a tax software called Avalara, which basically allowed my client to actually, calculate tax properly. I actually am the one who actually researched something called tax codes, which tax codes just basically means that, you actually look for the type of service that you offer, and then there's going to be an associated tax code to it. So essentially, I was helping implement that aspect of it. Another piece that I helped implement was actually the payment processor. At the time, we use a payment processor called Stripe. So Stripe is a very common payment processor, which basically just allows you to accept credit card, payments, ACH, which is basically just bank transfers. So essentially, it was definitely a busy time overall because we were doing a lot of testing to make sure that things were flowing from one system to another. Another system that we were using was Salesforce. Salesforce is a CRM, or customer relationship manager, which I mentioned before, where we house most of our contract data. So essentially, Salesforce was effectively going to push all of their information, all the customer information, into NetSuite, and then all of that information was what was going to be used to actually then generate the invoice. So it was definitely a complicated thing. It was my first time implementing NetSuite, and I mainly was a QuickBooks user, and in my current client also used another software called Zora, which was it's not a very common accounting software. So yeah, it was definitely a weird time because as I was working through the NetSuite implementation, we were actually making headway. We actually were helping. We actually were able to actually get it implemented by the time frame. My client wanted it by October 1st of 2021, which we did. We actually managed to actually get it implemented, and then yeah, it was successfully rolled out for the revenue side and the sales side. So we were able to start getting invoices in there, and actually start getting our journal entries in there as well. The weird thing was that while all this was going on in the background, we actually were thinking about like the new house as well that we just purchased and what we were going to do with it. So at the time we were looking for contractors, and we actually needed to start fixing it up. So that's exactly what we did. We actually found someone, and then he actually started to to demo the property and started to actually like start fixing things here and there structurally, and he even built us a shed on the property as well. So overall, we did start making progress on the new property as well, where we actually started to like fix things here and there, make things a lot more structurally sound. So overall, it was great. We were I was helping out, making my investment grow while also helping my client get to the next level and implement their new accounting software. So while I was in jury duty, everything was going great. But to my surprise, I actually got something from my client where they were asking me like, "Hey, like, would you be willing to, leave your employer for us?" We had a great relationship. I've already been with this client for like a year and a half. So yeah, definitely a weird instance where I was not expecting to come out of the consulting game already. I was making great money. Working you know working overtime, so I was making some decent money here and there. But I did realize that I did want to actually go back into the private sector, as I mentioned, and I ended up actually taking the offer. I ended up actually working for my client, Electric AI. I actually signed the offer in December of 2021. So essentially, I transitioned away from being a consultant to now being an employee. Of course, I negotiated a great package with them where, I effectively got the salary that I wanted without having to work the extra hours that I used to. So yeah, so it was a win-win for both of us. So essentially, I was able to not just work for my new employer with a great salary, but I was able to actually start to not have to work so much because it was really wearing on me that working 80 hours a week is really tough on the mind. Like I was kind of losing my sanity in the sense of I just couldn't even focus anymore. I was very irritable. I was constantly yelling at not just like my parents, but I was yelling at my sister, my even my own dog. It was a weird time where I didn't even know who I was at the time. So sometimes it's okay to take a break and not overwork yourself because sometimes you'll lose sight of who you are. So I just want to say that just make sure that you guys are pacing yourselves, not killing yourselves and overworking yourself, because at a time you're gonna lose yourself. So yeah. So the year ended with me signing the contract, me getting out of Robert Half, and now moving on to Electric AI, and it was definitely an interesting time for me in 2021. So I was still working from home. I was still making it work during COVID. So overall, great 2021, new property, new job, and yeah, it was overall a great year for me. Even though like I was working a little bit, quite a bit, but hey, that comes with the territory. Alrighty, and with that, that's gonna end Anthony's Journey, episode 14. I hope everyone out there has a blessed day, and adios.
Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing an amazing job, and I'm wishing everyone out there all the best. All right, until next time, adios.